This video contains spoilers for the Xenoblade Chronicles series. Quick disclaimer before we begin, I just want to make it known that I am not a total expert in everything Xenoblade, and everything that I discuss herein is just my thoughts and opinions, and there might be some minor things that I'm incorrect about, so if that is the case, please bear with me. Hello my gamer compatriots, it's me, Onion Creature, and I'm here today to talk about Xenoblade Chronicles 3, which came out this year and is a pretty noteworthy game. For me especially. I was introduced to the series in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and I played through the first game on Wii, and then Definitive Edition, and now I've made it to 3. Nonetheless, I have thoughts on this game. I wrote down some of them, and we're going to go over those because this game's kind of crazy. There's a lot going on. These games are noted for being quite dense, and so I have a lot to say about it. There's much to discuss, so we'll get into that. First order of business is the special edition of Xenoblade Chronicles 3. This was something which was fraught with much controversy, and rightly so, because it was really an annoying thing to deal with. Basically what happened was Xenoblade Chronicles 3 was originally supposed to come out in September. It got pushed forward to the end of July, which was cool. However, the issue is that the special edition was not ready to be shipped by then, and so Nintendo had to come up with a sort of workaround to allow people to get the special edition later, even though the game was coming out in July, but the special edition was still coming out in September. So, I got it in hand. That's great. It's a nice special edition. I like it. It has a really cool art book and a steel cover, which is more than the last Xenoblade special edition. For one, which only had the art book, it did not have a steelbook. This one does, and is cool. The issue was that Nintendo, basically their solution to this problem in North America and also Europe, basically they were like, hey, we're gonna put the pre-orders on our store and you can pre-order the game there and the game will be shipped to you when the game releases, and then you'll get the special edition later in the year. I said, okay, I want that because I want the special edition. This is a series I value. I'm confident enough in it that I know that I'm at the very least going to like the game, and having a special edition is something I'm going to want, especially because it's going to be basically impossible to get later on. Look at the Xenoblade Chronicles 2 special edition. It goes for what? Upwards of at least $500 on the resale market, which is absurd. So they announced that. I was like, okay, fine. That works for me. Pre-ordering on the Nintendo store, that seems like a reasonably okay option. Guess what? It wasn't, because the first day that they opened the pre-orders, there was this giant online queue that basically very few people, as far as I know, were able to get through, and the website kept crashing, and it was not good. And this was the only way to get it in North America. I was out and about when that happened, so I just kind of was like, okay, I'm just not gonna deal with this. I'm assuming they're gonna have another day in which they're gonna open up the pre-orders. They did, they announced that. So they opened the pre-orders again. I'm at my desk. I sit there for a little bit. It's not too bad. It takes longer than is ideal, but I did get a pre-order secured. And then some time goes by and the release is coming up soon. And I'm the kind of person who really wants to play the game on release. I bought the special edition because it's a series I really love and I want to be playing it as soon as possible. I think it's a special experience for me to be able to play something when it releases. It's just how I've come to do things. Maybe it's a majorly consumerist part of my brain, but it's just how I function. It's something that I value. And I'm willing to bet that a lot of other people who pre-ordered the special edition of the game are the kind of people who want to be able to play it when it releases. I think that's a fair assessment. That's pretty likely. However, the Nintendo Online Store, as far as I can tell, for a majority of people, shipped the game on July 29th, the day it released. So basically, the biggest fans of the series, the ones who are the most committed to it, are forced to wait several days in order for their game to be shipped, even though nothing extra is coming with it. This is what came in the mail. No big box, just the game, which is something that you could buy at Best Buy or GameStop or Target or something. It's not like... It shouldn't be that hard to ship this to people. And, you know, a lot of sites will actually ship a game to you and get it to your door by the day it's released, not the Nintendo Online Store. And since that's the only way to get the special edition, you have to wait like 5 days. I think I got it the Tuesday after it released, which was horrible. especially for a game like Xenoblade Chronicles, where there is definitely going to be spoilers online. I would say the sooner that you get the game in your hands and are playing it, the sooner you can avoid spoilers, because you'll have encountered them in the game itself. So it was just a horrible, frustrating experience. You'd hope that Nintendo would be better than this. Clearly, I guess they're not. This is just one area. Certain areas Nintendo tends to do a very good job. You know, I think there are certain areas where I can commend them. This is not one of them. This is one where, as a fan, you're being punished for pre-ordering the special edition of a game which you're not getting for several months after you pre-order it. It was very frustrating, and it's something that I never want to go through again, so please never do this again, Nintendo. It was horrible. Thanks. Anyway, I think with that out of the way, we can finally get into talking about the thing itself, the subject of the video, Xenoblade Chronicles 3. But I really did have to get that out of the way, because that was a part of how I experienced this. You know, the lead up to a game and how it's shipped to you and stuff. That's all part of the experience for me. So I found it worthy of discussion. So I have some notes I'm going to go over now, and we're just gonna dive in. We're just gonna see what I thought about this game. So I'm gonna go over gameplay first. Battling itself is probably the best in the series so far. It flows very well, and I would say is generally quite enjoyable. It's an improvement over 2 and 1, in my opinion. I like how it is. It's pretty snappy. I really like how the cutscenes before a boss battle or enemy battle transition directly into gameplay. You can see this in the opening and in a lot of other scenarios. It's just cool. It's very cinematic. The game has 2 different factions, and they represent the 2 different worlds of Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and Xenoblade Chronicles 2. The arts of characters who originate from Xenoblade Chronicles 1 function similarly to how they functioned in Xenoblade 1, where they power up over time, whereas the arts of characters from Xenoblade Chronicles 2 power up by auto-attacking an enemy. And I thought it was cool that they did that, and that was just a good detail. Good attention to detail there. Another great thing about battles is that you can now change between characters on the fly, basically instantly, whenever you want, which encourages you to use the characters more. I actually used the different party members far more than any other Xenoblade game. I basically only used Rex and Shulk in the previous games, and that's because going into the menu and switching your character was not something I really wanted to do. It was kind of burdensome. It didn't feel like it was built into the game as a primary system. Whereas here it just feels like, yeah, switching characters is something that the game wants you to do, and you can tell that it wants you to do it because it incentivizes it. It makes it feel like it's a more core part of the experience, and that worked for me, and it made the gameplay feel more diverse because you can switch to these different classes which do different things. Just a great change. The chain attacks in this game are pretty cool. They play some good animations, and it's really fun to try and get a really high percentage. However, I got really tired of them after a while, especially later in the game when you're on the final chapter. It really messed with the pacing, I think, of battles. It made them kind of drag on, especially when you're fighting weaker enemies. It became more of a burden than anything else, and the musical interruption, while the music for chain attacks is good, became unwelcome after a while because, you know, you're just hearing the same track over and over again. So yeah, even though I liked the chain attacks, I think they should have found some way to speed them up after a while. Like, you can't skip any of the animations, even though you've seen them hundreds of times. You have to watch them in full every time you use a chain attack, which gets tiring. I do really like the XP you get from it. The bonus EXP is really satisfying to try and collect, especially on the overkills. It's really cool, but again, after a while you get tired of it, and it didn't feel like it was worth it after a certain point. An interesting change to battles is that only the healers can revive fallen party members now. I really prefer the hero and class system in this game far more than the blade system in Xenoblade Chronicles 2. It's far more clear and less confusing than the system in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, where there were blades that you unlock with core crystals, which was essentially a pseudo gacha system, which was honestly probably one of the worst parts of that game for me on a subjective level, because it meant that unlocking new blades was random and took a lot more effort than it should have, whereas in this game they're tied to quests that you just do, and the quests are actually good. and they're worth doing because you unlock a character for doing them, which is infinitely better than core crystals. I'm very pleased that they've moved away from it because it was not a good idea. There were quests associated with blades in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, but I did not do many of them because A, I didn't unlock a lot of the blades, and B, there were a lot more contingencies on whether or not you could do them. You had to level up certain attributes. It was a less clear system, to put it mildly. So this just works better. It makes more sense in the world, and I can just get it. And I think normal people who have not played a bunch of Xenoblade will also be able to connect with this system more, I think. Quests overall are, I would say, generally of a higher quality, specifically the hero quests and the like. The side quests are still pretty, ho-hum. They're not that compelling as is usual, but the bigger quests, the more major quests, do have some good cutscenes and some good story details that are divulged in them, so they're actually worth doing, and that's great because that's what you want in a game that has a lot of side quests, is you want them to actually be worth doing. It can either be like you get good gear for them, or it offers a compelling story, or you learn more about the world. I would say Xenoblade Chronicles 3 does a much better job than its predecessors of giving you actual reasons to do quests. I really was impressed by that, and that's one of the best improvements for me over the previous entries in this series. There are even some pretty major plot points and characters from the main story that are only really resolved in the side missions, which I think is a good thing for the most part. I mean, in some cases it might have been better to have them as part of the main story, but overall I think it's fine just because there's already so much going on. To have it be side content that you can pursue at your own leisure. That makes sense to me. Optional guidance is another new feature. It manifests itself in this sort of line that you can follow to, and it'll lead you, generally speaking, to your destination on a main quest or a side quest. I didn't think that I would use this that much, but I actually ended up doing it quite a bit, specifically in some of the side quests where it's not exactly clear how you get from point A to point B. Some of the landscapes can be kind of twisty and have different caves or whatever, and so it can be a little bit of a challenge to get to some places, and so that's just a good quality of life feature that is always an option that you have if you get turned around and aren't really sure how to progress. Auto run from Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition is back, so you don't have to be holding your thumb up for like minutes at a time if you don't want to. Video capture is back. This is where you can hold down the capture button on your Joy-Con or Pro controller. It'll take a 30-second video. Always something that I look for in Switch games, and Nintendo first-party games tend to have that, so I'm glad to see it return. A new feature that was pretty neat is that you can press L and R simultaneously to take a screenshot, and it'll clear off the UI to take a screenshot so you can get some nice landscapes shots or pictures of the characters. Just a nice little thing to have. A nice little mini photo mode. It's not obtrusive, it's not that in-depth, but it's nice to have. I think the game flows pretty well in the early parts, especially compared to Xenoblade 2, though granted I am more used to this format than a newcomer would be, and they might find it more difficult to get into the flow of it than I did. I really liked the class system. I think that it added a lot of variety to the game, and even though it adds a lot of complexity, personally I didn't find it overwhelming most of the time, and being able to level up the different classes gave you something to work for, even if you're doing kind of grindy stuff like just fighting enemies, but you know in the back of your mind that this is progressing your class level, and that's a good thing to do, and it's fun to be able to use the different class types on the different characters. You can unlock different arts when you level up the class, which you can then transfer to other classes, so there's just like tons of stuff to do, and you don't have to do most of it, but I think it's good to have that as something you can do. It adds more to the game, more depth. You can choose the clothing of party members independent of class. Personally, I set it to default, because I'm that kind of guy. I'm a default clothing for my main characters kind of guy, but it's cool that you can change it and there are lots of different options. This game does, unfortunately, like its predecessors, have a lot of tutorials. I didn't find them quite as obtrusive as in 2, but there's definitely more of them than there should be, probably. And I get why they're there, because the game is pretty complicated, but there should probably be an option to have less of them, I would say. Next section is the world of Xenoblade Chronicles 3, so let's talk about that. This is by far the most bleak Xenoblade Chronicles world, which is something I found pretty compelling, and that's a huge part of this game's identity and its themes, is that the world is just awful and really depressing. I loved how there was some gameplay implementation of this theme. You have Noah and Mio as the Off-Seer, where they send off the dead with their flutes, and you literally find just dead bodies on the ground all over the place, and you can play your flute to send them on. They turn into little particles, and it's always like a somber little moment, and there's lots of them. It's just something that doesn't add a lot in terms of gameplay, but like thematically it's pretty damn cool. There's also skirmishes, which take place in the environment, with war being another big theme of the game. And these can be between different monster enemies, or oftentimes they will be skirmishes between the two different warring clans of Agnes and Kevis, and you can choose which side you wanna pick, and you will kill the other side. I thought the concept of every person having a 10-year lifespan, all of which they spend at war, just horribly bleak, and something which is a unique idea that was executed very well, especially early in the game. Later in the game, they kind of hand-wave it away a little bit, which is okay, I think, because the story's kind of moved on. But the first half of the game, or the first 2/3, it's a pretty central theme that we don't have much time to exist, and we are spending all of it killing people. So would be better not to do that. So that's what we're trying to break free of. We're trying to break free of this horrible cycle, and I think that's a compelling way to start off the story, and it makes me sad to think about. I think it's a pretty sad state of affairs, and so challenging that status quo is something that I as a player can really get behind. You want to have the player and the main character aligned in their goals, and I think this game does that very well. Exploring the worlds is very fun. Overall, there's a lot of optional locations. I would say more than the previous Xenoblade games. I've come across whole different sections of land which are totally optional just after beating the game, and walking around. There's just this whole different desert area I hadn't found, and another different desert area, and the sea location has all these different islands with different stuff on it. And so even though it's really big, it does feel like there's stuff worth doing on most of it. I liked the overall flow of the main story, where you sort of explore the different environments, and then you find a new colony, you fight the consul, and then you break the flame clock. And then after you do that, you unlock side quests in that colony after you've befriended them. And I think that sort of narrative and gameplay flow tied together really well, and was something which worked for me. In this section, I'm going to talk about the game's visuals. There isn't as much of a jump from 2 as I might have liked. However, it does overall look better, and it is more consistently good looking, and it has a better frame rate than 2 did, because 2 had a lot of frame drops, and it also had a lot of resolution dips, and this game just doesn't have that. It's just more consistent. That is an improvement, even if it isn't the most exciting improvement. It does go a long way in making it feel like an overall more high quality experience. One thing that I found interesting is that the hair has a different style than in previous entries, where it looks kind of painted now. I got some sort of filter or renderer or what have you that makes it look like it's painted, which looks interesting, and it looks suitably anime. This is an anime video game, unfortunately. So that choice was a good one, I'd say. I think that looks pretty nice. One thing that I liked about the visuals is that the NPCs all looked of an acceptable level of quality, which is something I cannot say for Xenoblade Chronicles 1 Definitive Edition or Xenoblade 2. Those NPCs, especially in 1, are god-awful. Even in Definitive Edition, they didn't really do much to change them. And in 2, they look not great either. But in 3, they're pretty decent looking. It doesn't hurt my eyes to gaze upon their visages. One thing that was pretty amazing was seeing familiar shapes and locations on the horizon. Specifically, we got this main thing on the title with the Urian Titan being stabbed by the Mechonis sword. I guess in the game they're not that close to each other, but the box makes it look like that. You can see little parts where you're I see, that's part of the Mechonis, or that's that looks like the Bionis's head. Just see them in the environment. It's surprisingly subtle. I was expecting it to be more blatant than it is. Sometimes you can't really tell which game it's pulling from or where it's pulling it from. Some spots sort of looked like Gourmati to me, but I wasn't quite sure. But it was cool. It's like just a neat idea and ties into the themes of the game, of it being a combination of the two worlds, so it physically is a combination, but it's also like a new world. It's by merging together, it has formed something new, which is interesting. I think the character designs in this game are very strong. I like them a lot better than the ones in 2 overall. They feel more toned down and less, they're less, you know, they're more subdued, which is, I personally prefer. Some of the designs in Xenoblade 2 were just far too over the top and garish. These ones, there's like hints of that, but it never goes to the extreme like Xenoblade 2 did, and feels like a, you know, sort of middle ground between 1 and 2, which is, I think, a good place to aim for. And I loved how they incorporated design elements from 1 into the design of Kevis with the mechs. Their mechs look like Metalface and the other Mechon, which is super cool. On Agnes, it's a little more Japanese. It's a bit more like angelic looking. Their mechs look like the sort of angelic looking mechs that were in 2. I also like the design of the other factions, like the Consuls and the Mobius and the Ouroboros, the city characters. That was something in the Donkey video. He was like, haha, they don't know what a city is. And it's like, yeah, but like in the context of the story, it makes sense that they would say that. Well, we won't get into that. That's a little bit of a controversial video there. We'll not go there. But anyway, the city characters, those were pretty cool. I have some actually minor nitpicks with some of the city people, but we'll get to that maybe. But yeah, that was cool. I loved getting the descendant of Vandahm. Guernica Vandahm is the new guy, and he's the one who gets the story kicked off. He dies again in a way which parallels his death in 2. And then we have his daughter and granddaughter as other major characters which show up in the story with their signature Australian accents. I found, what's her name? Gondor, the city of Gondor. I found Gondor kind of annoying. That was the point, obviously. It's supposed to be kind of abrasive, but I think they took it a little far. Yeah, but the different characters and stuff, they all kind of go together well, and I liked it. In terms of cutscenes, I think this game is continuing the trend of Xenoblade cutscenes being really fantastic. This game features probably my favorite cutscenes in the whole series. However, there are still plenty of quote-unquote budget cutscenes, I call them, where basically they're clearly lower tier. They're not a priority, and these are like story sections. A lot of time it's just when people are talking and they're just kind of standing there and the camera is static, and you can tell that less resources were allotted to those cutscenes. Even though there's still a lot of those, and some of those I wished were given higher priority, I think overall they blend better into the game than in Xenoblade 1 and 2. Like the budget cutscenes feel like they're of a higher quality than the ones in 2 and 1, which was something I liked, even if sometimes they were pretty plain. They were more consistent to me. Now we'll talk about the music. The music did seem to be mostly orchestrated, or at least it sounded like it to me. I don't have an expert opinion, but I can usually tell when something's orchestrated and when it's composed with MIDI, kinda. I try to be able to do that at least. And to me, it just sounded great. It sounded live recorded, most of it. In previous games, there were some tracks that felt budget. Specifically, some of the action songs just sounded, to me, like really cheap sounding. In 1 especially, and also there were a couple in 2 which just didn't sound good to me. 3 does not have that problem. All of the tracks were sounded about of the same quality in terms of their orchestration to my ears, which I loved. That was something that was good. There's also less of the goofy anime songs. That was something that was in 1 and 2. There's usually some cutesy music that sounds like, I don't know, it's kind of a stereotype in anime to have that cutesy music. There's less of it in this game, which works because tonally it is a bit darker. This is one of the nitpicks I have about the music, is I think the area music overall is not as memorable. the music in the different towns, or I guess they're colonies, and then the city, and also just in the world when you're walking around. I would say overall not as memorable. There's no track that sticks out as much as some of the best in Xenoblade 1 and 2, like with Gour Plain, Gormott. The ice locations in Xenoblade 1 and 2 also had amazing music. More Ardain. That track is amazing. None of the ones in this are nearly as bombastic, and that's probably a stylistic choice. However, I think it is kind of part of the series' identity to have a track which really grabs you. And the location music in this game does not tend to do that very much. And that's kind of sad. Battle music, I would say, is in line with previous Xenoblade entries. It has, I'd say, more of the jazz style thing that we heard in Torna and Future Connected. And I like that. That's good. The Mobius has a really dark, epic sounding track, and then you have different variations of that with the flute in some later story sections. The cutscene music actually tended to knock it out of the park a lot of the time. I think they might have overused the main theme, like the flute theme. The one like that, maybe a little overused, but one thing I was glad, I was actually pleased to see the restraint on was the vocal tracks. Xenoblade 2 has a main vocal track where it's like, no matter how much wind will blow against me, I will keep on. And they used that a lot in Xenoblade 2. I wouldn't say they overused it, but they did use it a lot, and maybe it lost some of its impact because they used it so much. So in Xenoblade 3, it's more like Xenoblade 1, where there's very limited vocal tracks. I think I can think of 3, maybe. But one of them plays in a really important story moment, and it made that hit so hard to have that amazing vocal track accompanied with it. And then at the end of the game, there's also a vocal track which really hits you. It hits you deep, man. The vocal tracks in Xenoblade kind of knock it out of the park. Even if it's not a style which I would normally appreciate, the execution of it is so outstanding that I can't help but feel emotion. I was kind of surprised to see that there were some bugs in the game, specifically some audio bugs, where the audio will, or specifically the music will skip on occasion, especially if you load into a new area. Sometimes the music will just skip for the area music, and it was weird because that is something that has not happened before for basically any Nintendo game, and I was surprised to see it. There were also some motifs from previous Xenoblade games included in this, mostly at very specific moments. There was less use of previous motifs than I might have liked, but I did still love hearing them, and it was great when the first one came up. That I noticed really strongly. Next, we're going to talk about some of the themes that are prevalent in Xenoblade Chronicles 3, because there's quite a bit to discuss there. I'll probably only scratch the surface here, because there's a lot to delve into. One thing I really appreciate is how thematically cohesive the game is. Everything fits together very well in terms of its thematic elements. I would say the most major and obvious theme is time. Both previous Xenoblade Chronicles games have had time included in their themes in some way. In Xenoblade 1, it was the fact that you're living on an ancient Titan. Shulk has the power to see the future via the Monado. The Hyentia live for an extremely long time compared to humans. That's another time-related element. And then in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, a big element of that game is the Blades and their relationship with humans, and how the Blades are reincarnated over time, whereas humans just die, and the Blades kind of live for an incredibly long time compared to humans, and then evolve into Titans, which then live for a very long time after that. And so the sort of life cycle was continued to be a theme there. In 3, I think they really took that even further than they have before, with everyone having 10 years to live, all of which they spend fighting. And war has also been a major theme in previous Xenoblade games, especially 1, where the war between the Mechonis and the Bionis was a major story element. In 3, the world is frozen in time. Some stuff happened where the worlds were going to converge, and so Melia and Nia got communicating and decided to put all the data of the worlds into this origin, which is this big metal ball, and the worlds were going to combine, and that the data from the different worlds. It's going to survive the convergence. It's a little hard to wrap your brain around. I'm still trying to like totally understand it. I rewatched the cutscene where they explain it, and I'm a little more clear on it, but it's something that it is kind of complicated to understand everything that's going on. So still working on trying to grasp everything that's going on, even if I feel like overall I get the main picture. But anyway, the world has been frozen in time by Mobius, which is this like negative force, which is made up of like fear and doubts about like the world converging and not wanting to move forward, basically, and being afraid to move forward because it could just be total oblivion, which would be bad, probably. But anyway, Mobius forms out of these negative thoughts and energies. It exists to perpetuate itself in this timeless state where it's existing in a world of stasis in this like pocket dimension, basically. And it harvests the life force of the soldiers of Agnes and Kevis, who are then reincarnated in order to fight again. So that's another element of time, but they can also be taken out of rotation if they survive long enough, which is pretty cruel. And I love that. I actually thought that twist where at the beginning of the game, surviving 10 years and being sent off by the queen and an Off-Seer in a ceremony, it's like the highest thing you can aspire to, but then you learn that, oh, that was basically them just taking you out of commission because you were too good at killing people. And it would be better if you just did not exist anymore for the status quo to remain, which is like, Jesus, man. The soldiers themselves are like reincarnated souls from Origin, from the different worlds. I got a little off track there, but anyway, the point is there's a lot of time imagery. Clocks are featured, the Ouroboros symbol, the snake eating its tail, Mobius, the Mobius strip, infinity, flame clocks. Yeah, lots of circles and clocks and time. I feel like even casual people who aren't that interested in the story or lore will pick up on that theme. It's pretty clear that time is very important to this game's world. The main character's name in the English dub is Noah. Obviously, that brings to mind Noah's Ark. Previous Xenoblade Chronicles protagonists have had names which kind of indicate their story role. Rex, that like translates to king. He's like the king of the blades, basically. He's like the master blade driver, kind of. Yeah, okay, there we go. Noah, that brings to mind Noah's Ark, the biblical fable in which Noah builds an ark because the world is horrible and needs to be remade. Pretty obvious parallel to Xenoblade 3, where Noah is on a quest to destroy the world and remake it because it's in a state in which cannot continue, and the only way forward is to remake it. Yeah, you can extrapolate a lot on the themes of it, which I think is really cool. For a story-based game, having some pretty strong themes is something you want, and Xenoblade Chronicles 3 definitely has themes. I'm going to go over the main cast and my thoughts on them. Noah, I think, is a really strong protagonist. He feels very, very similar to Shulk in terms of his mannerisms and the way he talks and it behaves. I think what really elevated him was his relationship to Console N, who is a previous version of himself, the like original version of Noah, who just got so tired and defeated by his existence that he just gave up and gave in to Zed. It was just like, okay, I cannot live in this cycle anymore. What matters to me is Mio and existing with Mio. I just can't watch myself and her and everyone else die over and over again anymore, and just gave up. And I think that's relatable. I think Noah understands that, and like I think that's a very empathetic place to take that villain. It goes far with it, and I was impressed. And that helped to really solidify Noah as a character, because his thoughts on that and how he chose a different path than Console N speaks to his mindset, and that just worked. And we have Mio, who's the other kind of central protagonist, very closely tied with Noah. They're both Off-Seers. That's like the main driving force of the first part of most of the game is Mio is dying in 3 months, and there's like basically nothing we can do about it, and so like we're just trying to find something. It's always in the back of your mind, like, oh yeah, she's dying very, very soon. And I love how this different chapter points are accented with her journal. That was a good element. And then her relationship with Console M also worked very well, and how Console M sort of working against N and is basically the driving force for the reincarnation of Noah and Mio back into the world. Like I said, the story is very dense. Then we have Eunie, who is a Hyentia descendant person. She's took me a bit of time to warm up to. She has a kind of intentionally abrasive personality. Some pretty fun voice acting, though. I think I like where her character ended up. Again, it tended to be kind of abrasive, at least at first. But I liked how she was like the one to realize that she's been reincarnated infinite amount of times, which is, that's not a good thing. I think that vocal performance sold that horror at that realization. So yeah, it worked in the story. Then we have Lanz, who's pretty damn similar to Ryan from Xenoblade 1. He is a Mechon person, which is cool. I like how they have the different races running around. Yeah, good character. Not as much depth as some of the other main characters, but I liked him quite a lot, and I think where they really tried to make his character shine is in the interactions with Joran and his friendship with Joran and how he felt regret over that. That was kind of the story element that they allotted to Lanz. Joran is a really good character, so I think that worked well to have Lanz be the main connection point. Then we have Taion, who actually quite an interesting character. He's kind of a nerd character who's kind of like overly like stingy in particular. Yeah, they gave him like a pretty good backstory with some tragic elements. Works pretty well. He kind of feels like he's more disconnected from the main party than everyone else. He's more like withdrawn. So yeah, I ended up enjoying that character. And yeah, they gave him the relationship with Eunie, and yeah, it was just another like, I don't know, pseudo-romantic element. They don't really ever act on that plot element, but that's just kind of a narrative point that is carried throughout the game. Then we have Sena, who was a pretty flat character for much of the game. Happy, I guess, would be her character trait. Cheerful, perhaps. But then they add some depth with her later on in some of the side quests with, who's that character? The character that kills herself. The character I was thinking of was this one, Shania. They kind of like have parallels where like Sena was doubting herself and too afraid to go out and follow her own path. And so they paralleled with that character. It ended up being okay. Probably one of the less interesting members of the main cast, but there's some depth there that you get into mostly in the side content, but in the main story as well. They touch on the self-doubt, I guess, is a major element of that character. Anyhow, I liked the main cast. I wouldn't say I like them more than the cast of 1 and 2, but that's also because I've grown accustomed to that cast. Overall, good characters, good team to have. You get control of them quite early in the game. In 2, it takes you quite a long time to get all the different party members, but in this game it's pretty early on. Alright, our next section is just a general discussion of the game's story. I liked how the two teams that comprise the main party are from the opposing sides of the war, and they each represent a different race or faction that is found in that society. So, for example, Noah is a human, Mio is sort of descended from a gourmet person, and also like a blade or flesh eater with the crystal looking similar to Nia, who was a flesh eater. And then we have Eunie, who's a Hyentia, and Lanz, who is a Mechon person, Sena, who has characteristics of a blade from Xenoblade 2. I guess Taion's just a person, which is similar to how he's a person, and there were people in Xenoblade 2 as well. Yeah, it was a good element. I liked seeing the accents remain pretty consistent from how they were in the past games. For example, the humans, Mechon, and Hyentia all have English accents. The Blade people, descendants, have American accents, as do the Indaline. Mio has a Welsh accent. Some of the other Gourmati-looking people had more English accents, from what I could tell, so they're not all consistent, but one of the other Gourmet people did have a Welsh-sounding accent, so they're keeping it mostly consistent. And then Vandahm and his ancestors have that characteristic Australian accent. That is one element I really loved in 2. It was also in 1. 1 was basically just everyone was English, but then in 2 you have the Scottish, Australian, Welsh accents, which add a lot of variety and character to the world. There was a bit too much invented slang for my taste, like spark this, or what's that snuffin' thing there, which sounds a little ridiculous. I don't know if that worked all that well. The Nopon are less prevalent in the main story than in previous games, which I think is a good change because if they were more prevalent, they might have detracted from the dark themes that the game is going for a lot of the time. In general, I would say there is less comedic relief, especially than in 2. 2 had quite a lot of comedic relief compared to 1. And so this kind of brings it back to the Xenoblade 1 level of comedic relief where it's there, but it's not as distracting. I really liked seeing Vandahm reincarnated. There aren't really that many characters who are like pretty directly just reincarnated into this game, but I'm glad they chose Vandahm because he's an amazing character and he gets another cool death scene. This is also the first time the characters see an elderly person, which is a pretty interesting story moment. Sad he had to die so soon, but I guess that's just like the character's destiny is to be killed off early in the game and to be a driving force for you as the player to move forward. Yeah, there you go. I didn't really like the Ethel and Kamuravi death scene. I thought that was kind of emotionally not effective because I didn't really understand what they were doing. I didn't know, like, I guess the point is they wanted to die on their own terms as opposed to being used by Mobius as a tool, as like a pawn in their game, but didn't really land for me, which was disappointing because I feel like emotionally Xenoblade games are pretty good at getting me with the character deaths, but that I was like, why did they have to do that? Which is not what you want to be thinking. So yeah, that was not as compelling as I might have liked. Didn't really get it at the time, and even now, like, having played some of the side quests, I still question that decision and how that was executed. Some of the side characters I wasn't a huge fan of. I feel like a lot of people like the character Ashera, but I didn't. I don't know, the style of comedy they were going for with there just didn't jive with me. Found the character pretty annoying, but that might just be me, because I've talked to people who like Ashera. I don't know. Not my thing, but I guess some people like that character. I feel like probably too many characters were brought back to life. It does contextually make sense for a lot of them. After a certain point, you're like, I feel like that character might have been better if they had stayed deceased, because bringing them back now feels like it cheapens their death a bit. It never ruined the experience, but it was something I noticed, and it does make you think. I liked overall how the game represented elements from 1 and 2, specifically the characters they brought back, Nia and Melia being the queens of each of the two factions. That was pretty cool and made enough sense. It doesn't make total sense, but it makes enough sense that I can buy it. I was disappointed at first when I thought they were just robots, but then it turns out there are robot versions of them which are being controlled by Mobius, but then there's also the actual versions of them which are just put in stasis, and then eventually unlock them as heroes, which is pretty fun. And yeah, I loved the musical accompaniment, especially with Nia, and it feel like just having those two characters instead of having the protagonists. Like if you had Shulk and Rex running around, maybe that would have been too much of a distraction, but if it's two characters which are important to the story but not the main character of their respective games that they originate from, I think it did work. I think it could have tied 1 and 2 together better in the ending. Specifically, I think overall the way this game ends is lackluster compared to the previous entries, even if it's in a standalone sense pretty good. Compared to the endings of 1 and 2, it just doesn't have the same impact. And I know that the game is capable of delivering an emotional level similar to that of the ending of 1 and 2, but it just didn't do that in the ending. It did it like 2/3 of the way through the game, which was odd. And that's like the next subject is it's a pretty major subject, is that the game peaks at the end of Chapter 5 and the beginning of Chapter 6 with that cutscene where you're stuck in the prison. I actually didn't love the build-up in the prison. I found it a little too time-consuming, and it felt a bit like filler. However, once you're actually in the jail cell and that cutscene plays, that phenomenal cutscene where you're stuck in jail and Mio is separated from the main crew, and then it builds up, and then you have Noah in a state of desperation, banging on the walls, and that amazing music playing, and the moon imagery. Man, it really came together. Like the whole game, like I feel like that's probably the best series of cutscenes in the whole series. It's just some of the best video game storytelling ever. And then you go to the ceremony, And it's just basically like the lowest of low points for the characters. Noah is in a state of utter defeat. Mio is dead, as far as we know. And then Noah is just killed. He just gets beheaded. And you get the flashbacks to N and just like all those different lives he lived and how horrible it was. Just torturous his existence was. And then Noah is revived because M had a plan, and I feel like I was totally fine with Mio and Noah somehow still being alive after the end of chapter 5. I thought that worked fine, because obviously you can't kill the two main characters 2/3 of the way into the game. You have to figure out a way to do that, and it felt reasonably natural to me. And then you have N, just like the situations are flipped, where he realizes that the Mio that died was his Mio, and now he's just like gone completely unhinged. It's one of the best vocal performances in the whole series, and probably in any video game ever. I was just like, jaw was on the floor, man. I was actually like sobbing during that scene. It was a really insane experience that basically no other game has offered me. The previous Xenoblade games have made me pretty emotional, specifically the endings, but nothing quite to this degree. I was like stunned. It's pretty unmatched. Yeah, and then that continues on, and the scene ends, and the story continues. I think it's kind of funny that the game gives you a choice between long-haired and short-haired Mio, and it's pretty funny because even if you choose long-haired Mio to be in your party, at the ending cutscene she reverts back to short-haired Mio, because I guess the devs just decided that that was the definitive version. Oh, I also didn't mention the cutscene where they become aware that babies exist. That was crazy and emotional. What a bizarre scene to put in a video game, and yet it works phenomenally well. It is not the kind of scene I would expect in a Xenoblade game, but they really pulled it off, and that helped lead into the emotional stuff where Mio has the child, and it parallels the scene where she's holding the hand of the child in the city. Yeah, I actually loved when the characters reach the city and they realize how horrible their existence is, when they see like what actual people live like what the point of life is. It's the point of life is not to be constantly at war, shockingly enough. Yeah, it felt natural, and it's just such a weird concept. I was really impressed with how they pulled that off. I loved N as a villain. He's like one of the most empathetic villains in the whole series. He felt like a much better version of Jin from Xenoblade 2, which I really liked Jin as a villain, but N kind of pushes it to the next level. And like, even though N has done objectively horrible things, you like actually understand why he would do that, which is something I didn't get with Jin, especially on the first playthrough. I did not fully understand his plight. But with N, I pretty much got it instantly. Like, I get why this character is the way he is. He went through so many lifetimes of hardship, and so his decision to join with Mobius makes a lot of sense, even though we as the player understand that it's incorrect. Noah, in comparison, has seen the path that N took and has learned that it's not right, and so chooses a new way, a new path forward. I also really enjoyed Joran as a villain. He's another one who is also very empathetic, has had just these really pathetic lifetimes where he just is constantly killed and trodden on, like literally run over by machinery. He's got a really pathetic existence, and so you understand why he seeks power, because he's just been downtrodden for so many cycles of lifetimes. That brings us to the main ending, which is, generally speaking, pretty disappointing in terms of what I liked about it. I liked that N was redeemed and sacrificed himself at the end, and I think that was pretty good. Probably not necessary, but I think we as the character are kind of rooting for N because he's a reflection of the player character Noah and the darkness that he's capable of if put in the right circumstances. So redeeming him, yeah, that does story-wise make sense, and emotionally it did hit pretty well. Zed himself was, as a villain, really disappointing. I was expecting more. I was kind of expecting some kind of twist with him. The twist was just that he was an amalgamation of negative thoughts about mostly about like the convergence of the two worlds. But yeah, he is overall the worst main antagonist. I much prefer Malos or Zanza. I think they were a lot better. I feel like they really should have tied in something about the, it being a post-apocalypse scenario. I really love the conduit, and it not being included in any way was pretty disappointing. I don't know. I guess they just don't have any place story-wise to go with that. But yeah, some reference to Klaus or the conduit or the Trinity reactor, I think. I would have loved to see that, personally. It's kind of a basic villain concept for a Xenoblade game. For another game, it's okay. There's some other instances I can think of which have pretty much identical villain. Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, Gates to Infinity, and Super Mystery Dungeon have very similar final bosses where it's an amalgamation of negative thoughts and energy. And I remember in those games it was pretty disappointing because we used to have Pokemon villains, like Rayquaza was the main villain in the first Mystery Dungeon, and then you had Dialga in the next entry, and those were really great villains as characters, and then having them not be characters but be amalgamations in the next games was disappointing. And that's a little bit how I felt here. It wasn't quite as simplistic as in the Mystery Dungeon games, but it feels like it's not really reaching the potential that the series has, especially after 2, which I felt weaved the story and ending of 1 into the ending of 2 really, really strongly. Yeah, it just does not feel executed as well as it could have, especially because you can tell that the writers and the creators of this game have such potential to make amazing story and emotional moments, and they just don't really reach it with the main villain of this game. He's pretty one note in that he's just like, yeah, I want the world to exist as it is because I'm afraid of the convergence, and it's like, okay, that's reasonable enough, but that's all there is, pretty much. However, after that, when I was not actually expecting the worlds to go back to separate again, so that was pretty great, actually. The way it was executed with, you have the vocal track playing in the background, and then you have the worlds splitting apart as they run towards each other, and you're like, damn, wow, that's actually very sad. And it kind of came out of nowhere. I was not... I don't know if they set it up as that much that was what was going to happen. And then after the worlds have separated, and that's a pretty somber moment, but it's bittersweet because the worlds have been saved. Time is continuing on, which is good, but the party members have been separated. That's a sad thing. But then it ties back into the beginning, which I was not expecting, and was really cool. How it's that festival in Xenoblade Chronicles 1's world. But this time there's like a hint that Mio and Noah will be reunited because you hear that flute main theme, and Noah goes off to find it, and that's how the game ends, which is that's a really good note to end on at the very least, even if the ending overall did leave me disappointed in many ways. That was still a good note to end on specifically. Speaking of the ending, there was some little cameos at the very end where we have Melia with the mechanical Monado. She still has the mechanical Monado. Cool. And then Poppy shows up with Nia. I guess she was just stored away somewhere in a closet and then comes out. I guess she's just been alive all that time because she was a robot. And then they have the the photo of the cast from Xenoblade 2 of some time has passed, and childs have been birthed, which is strange implications from the picture. Strange implications, which frankly I'd rather not dwell on. Anyway, overall, I guess with all those details summed up, that's all the different things that really stuck out to me about this game. I feel like I probably spent the most time talking about the story and the world of it, which makes sense because that's what interested me most about these games. I do enjoy the gameplay, but what I'm really there for is the story and the characters and the world and the continuing narrative that goes on through each game. And in some respects this did disappoint with that. Like I said, no connection to the Klaus conduit backstory, and the main villain was not as compelling. However, there were some amazing strong points, specifically with chapter 5 and 6. The gameplay, I would say, is the strongest in the series. It feels like it's continuing to be refined, and I like that. There's a lot of variety and a lot of little improvements. Even if the story in the end wasn't as consistently great as some of the other games, its high points were definitely higher than the series has seen before. I remember when I did a revisit of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, I was kind of musing about like how they might continue the story. I really had no idea, and I think having the two worlds be combined was a good way to do it. I was definitely expecting something much more compelling from the ending of this game, which I just didn't really get. Because the ending of Xenoblade 1 and 2 kind of recontextualize how you think about the world. Whereas by the time you reach the end in 3, you pretty much understand what the world is, and there isn't really anything revealed at that point about it. Basically, how the world functions and its purpose has been explained to you by that point in the game, and so you're just defeating the villain. Overall, it is a pretty great game, and definitely one of the highlights of the things I played this year. I played pretty tirelessly for a couple weeks when it was out, and I've got 65 hours about in there, and I actually want to go back and play more because there's more side quests and stuff I want to do, which is great. I feel like I've gotten my thoughts communicated through this video, so I will say goodbye for now. Thanks for tuning in to this review video of Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Much appreciated.